It's been a year, hasn't it, since the kind of unimaginable attacks by Hamas on some Israeli settlers. Since when Israel's military-level response has not stopped. I think the world stopped counting at 41,000 Palestinians dead. But the world hasn't commented in its mainstream media all that much on the nature of the destruction. Our leaders at least don't talk about it. The scale of the demolition, humiliation, the wiping away of very symbolic pieces of infrastructure for self-determination. The nature of all the claims of what's being done to Palestinian detainees, the violations. And that's before we mention exploding pages. But now, of course, with Israel spilling beyond its own borders, of course, into neighbouring states, all the media wants to do is talk about war. You know the drill. Is it war? Are you saying it's war? Is it war? Is it war, though? It's war! So that, of course, is all that anybody wants to talk about. And a year on, it just seems staggering the way we still have to talk about all this. And it jars with what I suggest we're all really feeling. And with more of the global public mood about this, that established leaders aren't reading, or at least feel they can't respond to. So as an outsider to all this, but an insider to planet Earth and humanity, like you, I want to talk about contrasts. 6 weeks ago, I had a very contrasting weekend. I was invited by dear friends of mine, David and Lynn, to a feature film table read. Thought that sounded like fun. I've never actually done one before. And because I'm not a professional actor, I just thought it was fun to be handed the narrator's part. You'll know if you are a professional actor, your heart will sink if that's the job you're asked to do. There's no job at the end of it, right? I thought it'd be a nice day out with friends of mine from the BCP film community. Really great gang. Meet a few new people, and I was intrigued by the movie. The movie was about something I have no direct relation to and not a huge interest in, especially in the way it's explored in most films. The experience of serving your country in the military. Written by the producer, who was writing very much from his own perspective, his experiences serving in Afghanistan in the Royal Marines. Now, I joked with David and Lynn, what's he going to have to say to me? I'm going to be some gnat buzzing about him with the things he's seen in life, and what he's gone on to do since, very different. Actually, he was a fellow storyteller, delighting in the nerdy details of film production. He wanted to show me other things he'd done, and I think it really encouraged him to hear his story brought alive by all the actors. And for me, it was a good, very basic workout as a storyteller. I had to read hours of narration. It was almost like a radio play. And I had to try to bring it alive and get through the military jargon, and also what I knew would be some very difficult descriptions of what it's like to go to war. Talking about very difficult things, actually having a very nice time doing it. Very next day, I went into Bournemouth Town Centre. A balmy, sunny, late summer Sunday morning. Town centre was buzzing with people enjoying themselves down in the square, beautiful lower gardens all the way to the beach. But in the middle gardens, I was attending my first ever counter demonstration. Now, you know me, I'm a terrible protester. As a balanced generalist, I can never quite get up the extreme end of anything. I am a reluctant revolutionary, but I've been to more demos recently because these are our times. This, however, was the first time I've written a phone number on my arm. It's the first time I've attended something that was a meeting of two ideologically opposed groups. Well publicised legal demo in front of the civic offices in Bournemouth Town Centre by a group of anti-immigration people. And then the local, lots of local groups got together on the opposing side, and I joined them. And there were a lot of contrasts just on that day. The weather and the sunshininess, the kind of resort town doing its thing in one part of town. Right next door was these two very seriously opposed groups shouting things at each other. With more police in Bournemouth Town Centre than I've ever seen. The feds were everywhere. It was like a festival of police service. Now, you know, as a middle-class white boy, I'm used to talking to the police. They're not a systemic threat to me. Mates of mine have worked in the service in different ways. I'm used to having a chat to them at festivals and going, how's it going? It's not true for all of us, is it? What they symbolise. And they were out in many forces in their stab-proof vests. And in the sunshine overhead, it is the first time I've heard a police drone equipped with a speaker. Special measures were in place that morning, and the speaker was telling us to uncover our faces, to remove balaclavas or hats, that we must be identified. And loads of coppers had face rec cameras all around us. Hearing a voice like that politely from the sky tell you to show your face. Very dystopian. Right there in the ornamentally planted middle gardens of Bournemouth. Another contrast was the two sides. We knew that those who'd been bussed in were largely from elsewhere. There's some faces at the front of that anti-immigration crowd that we'd seen on the telly elsewhere. Sort of ironically, they were stood in front of the civic offices, the town council's gaff, the place that has to be super inclusive and kind of right on, man. Meanwhile, all the lefties that I joined were corralled down around the cenotaph. And all those who were anti-fascist, it was a blizzard of signs. It was so many different issues, and the implicit understanding was that we all knew that all these different issues, standing up for queer rights and experiences, or animal rights and more than human world, the destruction of nature, lots of different climate crisis issues, standing against fossil fuels, or standing simply against racism. All those different signs, the forest of them, all fit together. That they're all different symptoms of the same economic nightmare. And you kind of got the impression everybody knows enough. that that's true. Meanwhile, on the anti-immigration side, basically one side: stop the boats. That's a phrase made up by the extremely partisan and not competent previous Conservative government. It's bullshit. And they were chanting it with passion. And I wondered what their sense of context was. On the Saturday of that weekend, there I was as an artist reading out very difficult experiences of what it's like to serve a country. And the next day there I am standing against its very structures. It's made me think about contrasts ever since. Big one in particular is the limbo we're still in, of course, with the American elections. It's apparently on a knife edge. And the contrast I felt there in late summer into the autumn is, on the one hand, the Harris campaign is tapping into some emotional truth. Really interesting moment in time with its not going back. I felt it. I felt the impact of that emotionally in my head when I was standing on the World of Love stage the morning that we thought we might get trouble from anti-immigration extremists that morning. And I was stood on the stage thinking, what do I say if they enter our... And I've got the microphone, I've got the stage, what do I say? And I just kept feeling the power of the words win, not going back. And the DNC in America a few weeks ago really did look like a sort of inclusive, joyful experience, contrasting with all the kind of la-la and dystopian hell of our usual political conversations at the moment. But also how that contrasted with the lack of Palestinian voices on that supposedly inclusive stage. Vice President Harris herself embodying change on the surface, representing a number of changes at once just in her appearance as a woman, as a person of colour, as somebody with different heritages, all in one, as an American. You know, she symbolises a lot of change. And yet, the passion with which she spoke vociferously, we will defend Israel's right to defend itself. Not a single Palestinian voice gets to speak up. You know, that's just racist. Oh no, you're not allowed to speak. Everybody else is included, but you're not. But we're being blown to pieces. Our infrastructure, our livelihoods, everything, everyone is being blown to pieces. We are living with death every day, and you're supplying the munitions, and we don't get a voice. And I'd say here too, a thing that really jarred with me was the way that Kamala Harris has passionately defended the rights of women and the way that their rights are attacked and eroded structurally, systemically, habitually in our world, right? And I'm sure she'd agree when I mention this long-held understanding that the euphemistic way the media talks about attacks on women, they talk about them as though they just sort of happen, like a weather system or a sudden outbreak of smallpox. A woman was attacked today. No, she was attacked by a man. A man attacked a woman. Tell it like it is. Now, you know how much I wish we could not invoke gender in the way we talk about most things, because it's political to do that. We don't need to, mostly. But when it is part of our cultural malaise, mention it, right? A man attacked a woman. It's part of what's wrong in our society, that there are those men for whom a sexual power thing turns into violence. I'm sure Kamala Harris would say, yeah, name it, call it out. So why then, Madam Vice President, When you first mentioned anything about the conflict in Israel, you said Hamas attacked Israel, but what is happening to the people of Palestine is heartbreaking. Not what Israel is doing to the people of Palestine, systematically, culturally, generationally. That contrasts horribly. Just as Sir Keir Starmer here in the UK. So many things that the Labour government are doing, some of them are kind of brilliant. The first speech by the Foreign Secretary is standing in the hot house of Kew Gardens talking about climate justice. Wow, that's visionary. And then Sir Keir Starmer, supposed former civil rights lawyer. That means less and less, doesn't it? That qualification of his. For a whole year, his mumbling lack of words on behalf of the atrocities, and that is the word, in Gaza and in the West Bank. The sheer numbers of people, machine dead. Before we talk about the culture surrounding it, how dark that is. As soon as Iran launches rockets at Israel, yeah, that's a big deal, right? But in response to attacks into its territory, assassinations. And yes, this is all part of the BS of different regimes, horrible regimes, but it's only then that Sir Keir Starmer leaps in front of a camera, standing in front of the Union flag, and says, "We will not let Israel. This will not stand. We stand with Israel. Her right to defend herself." It's weird genderising of that one nation. These things contrast horribly. And I mention all this because it's a vibe right now in you and me. And how are you and I supposed to respond with any sense of leadership? That's what we've all got to try and do. Is how can wherever we are, whether we're responsible for lots of lives and livelihoods and departments and budget, or we're individuals being creative, there's an adult parenthood leadership responsibility on each of us. How do we make sense of this? Because I think that contrast, that sense of contrast of being forced to stare into an abyss and open more of what our global system really is and what it's really built on, it's like this vibration in our head the whole freaking time. That constant it's going in whether you're paying attention or not. It's bad juju, man. And it's more sort of open than it's ever been. Years ago, before we were fractalised into the digital experience, things happened far away. We could believe in a leafy, quiet Britain that was liberal and progressive, because for an awful lot of white folk and others who'd had a good experience coming here and joining the party, it looked like that. But as soon as you get round the edges, as soon as you wash up on the shores of Fortress Europe, sitting in front of a screen on a Zoom interview panel for why you want to flee your home country and come in here, it's a very different experience. If that's you, you know that this is a land of feds in stab-proof vests and drones in the sky telling you to show your face, and weird arrests and all sorts of other things. I've had a dear mate, lived here for 20 years, fall into a problem at the border and be traumatised by what it put him through. Contrasts with the hopes and possibilities of where we live. So I want to suggest that we have to contrast that craziness with our own response. We might not be able to speak up regularly about deep politics or have the inclination to, but to stand against the horrible contrast they're giving us with our own sense of compassion. We've got to be able to, yes, utterly get over the blatant rubbish that you can't criticise the state of Israel because that's anti-Semitic. They're different things. Talk to all the Jewish people who do not think they are synonymous. But for those who think they are, we all know the historic context around the world, but especially in Europe. The bottom line is the only way you can keep systematically destroying a neighbour's life and livelihood, no matter what they've done to you. You can only do that when you dehumanise them, and you do ultimately think they're not really on the same level as you. You're more special. Your circumstances, your grief, the trauma you've been through that you must keep alive, as Naomi Klein puts it, keeping the trauma of the Holocaust alive. Keep that trauma, keep that wound wide open the whole time. You must keep staring into that wound from 80 years ago. And that justifies. You can't live like that. That's not a healthy life. When I went to Israel 20 years ago, I came away thinking two things. Wow, what a beautiful country. I slightly fantasised about living in Haifa. It's a gorgeous, leafy city, calm. But I also thought, wow, that's a country that defines itself as at war. And if you define yourself as a nation as at war, then all bets are off. Every strategy is on the table. And the nature of war is that you must dehumanise the other side in order to justify doing whatever it takes to strategically outwit acts of terror, exploding domestic devices, incursions into other territories, preemptive strikes. It all makes total sense if this is existential. What kind of leaders have we raised up that have to terrorise settlements, and even illegal settlements, have to resort to extreme terrorist expressions of retribution? You know, it's the cycle of violence. It just goes on. And who benefits? It's the war machine. America's sending billions, it's reported, to Israel, keeping that flow of munitions going to kill all the children, which is what happens. Why we distinguish between children, women and men, I don't know. We shouldn't. It's people. And meanwhile, trying to get that money supposedly into all the climate disaster areas across America, the floods and the fires, that's much slower to move. If we are to look forward, we have to contrast all that dead old world, profoundly, fundamentally unjust thinking with a view of the world that humanises everyone and goes much further, much more radically, that invests all life with the same sort of sacredness. That the more than human world we are destroying, we're destroying with the same old world mindset of total ownership rubbish. When we go to work where we are, we can't have all the answers. But to embody a future where you talk to everybody like a human being, you give everybody a chance to testify to their experience, and you're not immediately shocked and frightened by the idea that the system you were raised by might be wrong. Contrast the fear in you and in me about change, about our identities maybe not being what we thought they were. Contrast that with the confidence to be open to being part of change. I mean, we have to. And I would say, wouldn't I, of course, that you practice that confidence in creative ways. You write the stories, you embody bits of role play, you get out and you research and you talk to people on more neutral ground about what it's like for them, and you build a worldview that's more confidently sustainable, right? And you can do that as a poet on your own, struggling to find money, and you can do that as a leader of a foundation trust. But to have the courage to stand up against these eruptions of bullshit. Oh no, it's completely normal. It's completely normal. They're bad, they're good. This is imperial, colonial, settler thinking. Plenty of people would say that, because that's what it is. Move in, take the land. These guys are strategically useful, these guys aren't. That's just, we can't keep doing that any more than we can keep using up planetary boundaries and resources. We have to think much more confidently that we are all the same, and we are all feeling these injustices of the system not delivering, and a handful of idiots being raised up and being more and more disconnected from the truth of our complexity and richness, the truth of us all being one. You can't have a nuanced treaty sort of ready to go in an argument about who's right or wrong in a situation, especially online. You'll never win that. But by holding space for others to feel seen and heard, just in moments where you talk to them like a fellow human with their own story, it's that basic. Be that kind of leader. Contrast the horrible lies and dehumanisation with the way you humanise those you meet this morning. And 1 year on, we have to tell our MPs this has to stop. I really feel for you caught up in this. If your family is Palestinian and you feel helpless, and maybe you're part of the diaspora away, and I really feel for you if you're part of the diaspora of the Jewish community dragged into this and feeling yet again all the unsafety. Israel's the last place you should go to feel safe as a Jewish person right now, right? This is not about winning arguments. This is about showing love and compassion and understanding. And truly understanding this is our global economics, trying to divide us and throwing us into graves. Man, do we need to see all around us the new songs and stories of us. Start today, not another year. Lots of love, mate.